Is everyone ready?
Yep.
Great. Oh, and I'll take POIs in chat, and then if I miss them, just like at 5, please just audibly voice one. I'll take one, preferably from closing. 3 points of framing that are directly responsive to the speech you just heard, and then 2 core arguments. First point of framing. Clearly, it is not our burden to advocate for the counterfactual being some kind of like particularly violent or divisive language. If anything, by the own framing they've provided you in their speeches about why it is that like religions in the face of like secularization and fear of backlash from the state are likely going to be able to push their own narrative, claiming that their own religion has some truth to it, but probably aren't incentivized to piss off other religions, specifically majority religions, probably aren't encouraged to do the kind of most radical version of that speech. I think it is completely reasonable to imagine a world in which religions just say, oh, this is our truth, and don't say like, oh, you need to like go do other things to other religions, right? Second point of framing, though, I think their conception of how this works in places where there's one majority religion is a framing device that we can flip. The reason for this is simple. Absent the ability of religions to have some claim to authority, some ability to say that our religion has some kind of core philosophical truth underpinning it that is something that other religions do not have, I think that is uniquely bad for minority religions, because absent that, the way that religions get like more people or have negotiating power is their like social clout in society. The extent to which outside of Hinduism as a religion, it is also bled into things like culture, has also bled into things like history, has also bled into things like politics, suggests that absent we would say that the ability to claim your own religion as having some kind of truth is a unique equalizer here in terms of narratives. Third, though, I don't think they actually explain to you why it is that your conception of religions should be as like political parties jockeying for power. Like, we're going to make arguments in our speech to explain why it is that like I think there are other things that are in the interests of religions. They never do any kind of preemptive comparative weighing here or explain to you why it is that religions are just trying to get as many people as possible. Presumably intuition pump. If this were true, religions would just be super happy compromising on all their values to do what it is that the state wants to get as many people in them, like there's some kind of uni club trying to maximize membership. But I don't think that is an accurate way to conceive of religions. They're communities that have core tenets, and that is what we're going to be talking about now. 2 arguments. First, why is religious pluralism oftentimes just mutually exclusive with the core tenets of many religions? We would say that many religions have specific tenets where their claim to authority, the reason that anything they say has some kind of truth when you like follow the documentation or whatever, comes back to believing that there is something there that like presumes that what they are saying is capital T truth. Abrahamic religions just do not make sense if you do not believe that there is one kind of true God in Christianity that is the savior, in Judaism that just is the creator. In religions like Buddhism that aren't salvation based, there's still some kind of moral code that they believe to not just be like a suggestion that could coexist with other religions, but necessarily cannot coexist with other religions because it presupposes its own truth. Why is this likely the case? One, there are oftentimes self-justifying narratives that these religions use historically that are just baked into the thoughts of the religion because that is how this religion gained prominence in the first place. No religion ever gained prominence by being like, you know, you could believe this, but you could believe other things as well. But also things like their core documentation, to the extent that they believe that there's historical truth behind it, when Christians believe that Jesus was not like metaphorically one who died, but the person who literally died, that Muhammad was an actual prophet who lived. Presumably this documentation, the words of these individuals are things that are incredibly important to these people on the ground. So at that point, then, why is this not in their interest? I think it is directly antithetical to many people's core beliefs, or in non-debate language. I think it makes them feel incredibly bad. There is an internal dissonance when this narrative gets pushed, where because people tie their religion to their identity, I think it is likely the case that this feels like their most core beliefs are being attacked. They feel invalidated. In the context of a liberalizing world that trends towards just talking about religion as stupid, we would say that especially when this comes from other religions, oftentimes religions that may have more privilege or whatever, I think this amplifies the extent to which people in religions feel that society just does not feel like there is a place for them. It tells them that their beliefs are just like something that, you know, they can have a claim to, but just don't go around saying that what you believe is true, especially in religions where it is incredibly important to proselytize, not in the kind of like bizarre caricature that OG talks about, but just generally go on the street. It is important for them to proclaim their truth in order to gain salvation. There's a deep amount of tension here for these people. I think you should weigh the current members, oftentimes because these are the people for whom these religions have the most acute harms. These are the people who can these are the people who make up the religion and are the largest body of people. So on quantity, it is ahead. But two, I think to the extent that you want to care about things like getting other people into your group, there are other ways that you can do this. Things like concessions of like the most fringe ideas that you have, things like being a part of your community and trying to reach out to secular folks, doing things like providing mutual aid. These are all things that religions have done in the past successfully that didn't have to compromise on their core beliefs. Before I move on, closing.
So right now, many different friends or people even who are married believe in different religions. If your analysis is true, how can they coexist and live with one another without wanting to kill themselves all the time?
Wait, so I think there can be like interfaith marriages where neither person has to say, oh, our religion is probably not the true one, or we don't know. Like, I think they can both have some claim to the idea that their religion is the true one without needing to do the next, what you consider to be logical step of like antagonizing the other, right? Like, presumably your example here is an argument for us that there are many interfaith religions or places that are generally like diverse in opinion, but aren't ones where religious pluralism is a narrative that needs to be aggressively pushed. Second, why is this bad for the community? A couple of reasons here. First, I think it oftentimes radicalizes religions to the extent that religions are these kinds of political bargaining or political organizations that are doing things like horse trading. We would say it is much less likely that they are willing to compromise on things like fringe ideas, much less likely that they are going to do things to try to reach out to their community or things like mutual aid in a world where they feel like the core narrative that is being pushed is something that invalidates them. To the extent that it comes from either majority religions that are representative of the state or just other religions within their community, this is an added layer to the extent that secular society is already invalidating their narrative and already pushing many religions to the fringes to the point where they just feel like, oh, if we can't do enough to gain new people by being generally progressive or whatever, we at least need to retain the people that we have. So to the extent that you also care about religions as a political body, we think that this oftentimes fractures these groups internally to the point where it causes more internal divisiveness between individuals who feel that the religion is just like a general cultural like club or tribe and people who feel that the religion has degrees of philosophical weight. But secondarily, I just think it's considerably easier to get members. The reason that people join religions in the first place, oftentimes they're at their lowest. Oftentimes they're people who are seeking for some kind of capital T truth to bring meaning and structure and order to their lives in a world where religion does not have the ability to make that claim, or the world where there's more doubt. It makes it considerably harder for these people to gain the immense amount of value that comes from joining a religion. For all of these reasons, proud to oppose.
Can I be heard? Is everybody good?
Yep, you're good.
Great. I'll take POIs in the chat. I'll definitely take you, so don't worry about unmuting until I call on you. Great. Just because 4 debaters on government bench can find reasons that maybe religions shouldn't do something does not mean that religions act in that way. The argument and burden in this round is to talk about how religions respond to certain philosophies, how religious people respond to certain philosophies, and it is fundamentally intellectually lazy of opening government to get up here and tell you that, oh, because a way to do this well exists, that is likely to happen. What we on Opening Opposition stand for is a debate that interacts with the way that religious institutions and religious people actually deal with conflict in the real world and how they deal with these narratives. The second observation that I want to make then is about the trajectory of religion in the societies where we're talking about this. This only happens in places where there is a reasonable freedom of religion, where there is a number of religions attempting to peacefully coexist, oftentimes Western countries, but I'm actually going to also engage with the examples that we get from opening government, such as India. The general trajectory in all of these places is the same. That is, that absent the external impetus of something that is a strong compulsion to join a religion, and in most cases a majoritarian religion, people are becoming increasingly agnostic and increasingly atheist. It's not an accident that in 2019, the United States, for the first time in its history, became a predominantly agnostic and atheist country, with 51% of the population actually saying that they didn't identify with a systematic religion. Why is this important? Because religious pluralism is the actual thing that paved the pathway for this reality occurring. That is, that the idea of being open, the idea of being freer, told people that, hey, religion does not have this strong compulsion. The institutions of religion have come under attack. Churches have been seen as organizations that are tax havens. And they're also seen as organizations that teach things that are outdated and antiquated, and they have been seen as the bastion of the most conservative values in society and things that we ought aspire to get rid of. Religion is at an all-time low in these societies. But I want to talk about the example of India because I think that it's a good case for the other side and why specifically religious pluralism can't work for religious individuals. Because in India, when this happened, people voted out of fear. They were like, look, our religion is under attack, when in reality, it was just a world that was becoming more open. For 8 consecutive years, the percentage of Hindus in India had declined prior to the election of Narendra Modi, who ran on a very, very simple platform of Hindu exceptionalism, of saying that, look, Hindus are the only people that can really exist. Our policies will be Hindu first. And even if they pay lip service to saying, oh, we're going to do these other things, Hindus feel like that is specifically what Narendra Modi stands for. So at the end of the day, when they're actually able to galvanize and get a large amount of political support, it is on the basis of exceptionalism in opposition to pluralism and the weak form that we actually get from the Congress Party and Rahul Gandhi, who have now fallen out of power. So to be really clear, in the real world, it never works when you have religious pluralism and people actually crack down. There's 3 positive things I want to advance in this speech. First, that coexistence is cognitively dissonant. I'm going to deal with the example from opening government, but also other broader religions that we want to talk about. Second, that fracturing is then the greatest internal threat that these religions are likely to face. And that third, that radicalization happens substantially more with pluralism. First, on coexistence, I want to talk about the cognitive dissonance that occurs with coexistence because I think the argument proposed by opening government is the exact argument on our side of the house. When things like Qurbani or the sacrifice of a cow happens in the street in a place like India, it is not just saying that, hey, these other people can do this thing, but the fact that they're insulting the core tenet of the holiness of that animal in Hinduism means it does not comport with your version of reality. That how can I say that these people can coexist when the thing that they're doing disrespects the fundamental tenet of the religion that I believe in? There is no coexisting, right? It's like if a religion believed that murder was right and one believed that murder was wrong, and then one group of people went around going killing other people, and we were like, yeah, I guess that's okay because that's what their religion says. There are fundamental tenets of religions that do not and cannot coexist with each other. That is specifically what causes questioning. Because if your religious leader then said, oh, we should let those Muslims do what they want, we're trying to peacefully coexist in a pluralist society, people are like, what the fuck? Why am I actually doing that? Why should I believe this religion if you can't even back up what you stand for? That's how religions lose people. That's how religious people lose faith in their institutions. But secondly, even in other examples, there are fundamental actions of religions that rely on converting individuals. In a lot of forms of Christianity, there's a burden of proselytization to save souls and take them to salvation. By not doing that, by not specifically acting on that, the concept of religious pluralism in and of itself is in tension with the fundamental tenet of the religion. Secondly, on fracturing. This is the greatest internal threat that religions face because they have to make sure that in the face of an increasingly agnostic and atheist world, that they make sure they're able to maintain the number of members and maintain their religions or their members without actually compromising on their core tenets. So what they do is they compel people to do more and more extreme things. They tell them that they're unworthy of being saved unless they give to the church. It means that they're able to use more manipulative tactics, but also create more restrictive dogma that specifically says, look, you shouldn't accept these other people. This is the only way, the right way to live. That is how religions act specifically out of fear, and leads to the third thing I want to talk about, which is why radicalization happens more often with pluralism. Before I move on, POI from CG.
So most religions' conceptions of salvation and afterlife are not exactly the same. So why is it unlikely that religions can say that if you do this thing, you'll get salvation in Christianity without necessarily contradicting or saying that you cannot get salvation in another type of religious paradigm?
I think this question is like borderline like intellectually dishonest, because yes, your definition of salvation is different, but surely hell in Christianity, which is where you go if you don't believe, is different than salvation in another religion. Like, yes, heaven can have maybe different conceptions, or like what salvation in the afterlife looks like can have different conceptions, but surely in like endless suffering and some form of salvation are in fundamental tension with each other. Okay, talking about radicalization and how this manifests. I think I already addressed parts of this when I talk about the threat of fracturing and how religions fold in on themselves to make sure that they double down and create compulsion. But I want to do a little bit of analysis on two types of religious people. That is, the people who are heavily indoctrinated and believe in this religion no matter what. These are people maybe who are lifelong believers, stay here for the long haul, right? No matter how like the actions of the church change, they're going to go along with it. But the people who are trying to find religion, the ones who are newer believers, are the ones who need that strong compulsion to stay. Those are the ones who are at risk of leaving. And because, like Dennis tells you, we don't believe that religions are actually going to compromise their core tenets, because that makes them weak and appear like they're flip-flopping, which causes people to leave in the first place. They're going to go the other direction. They're going to double down and say, this is the only way to live. This is the right way to live. And this is what we're seeing as a response to pluralism right now. You can't coexist as much as we would like to. Extremely proud to oppose.
I think the yellow MG, please.
Cool. Am I audible and hopefully visible as well?
Yep.
Perfect. Can I have POIs in the chat, please? But if I don't take one by 5:30, interrupt me verbally. OO asserts that changes within religious narratives are always met with disengagement or anger. Panel, when the Pope voiced support for the LGBTQ community and gay marriage and things like that, yes, it was seen as a tangent from previous religious practices. Yes, some people were angry, but people were also receptive to religion changing in this way. People were also able to find examples and like evidence in religious scriptures that supported this interpretation of what that religion wanted. I think what this looks like for our side of the debate is also things like finding evidence and examples in, for example, Hindu texts or Islamic texts or Christian texts for religions interacting in a positive manner, and using that as an example for why coexistence can be a good thing and does not always have to be problematic. I think the way you accept philosophical validity of another religion does not require mandating or encouraging practices in that religion that are contradictory to yours. What it simply means is you recognize that there are stories, that there are logical links within that religion that result in encouraging certain practices within that religion. That doesn't mean you have to accept that that is something you want your followers to do. And I think the example of this is, it's Hindu leaders can maintain the importance of cows as holy figures or symbols of gods within their religious transcripts, while recognizing that because those same stories or same logical links for why they're symbols of religion don't exist in other religions, and recognize that that is the reason other religions might not do things like not eating beef or doing certain prayers and things like that. A couple of things that are going to set us apart from opening half. The first thing I want to do that OG doesn't is explain why antagonism is often the default in how religions interact with one another. I think there's three new reasons for this. The first is, if the current situation, as per OO, is one where individuals are becoming increasingly secular, increasingly disillusioned with religion for a number of reasons, retaining them often depends on invalidating other options. So oftentimes, even if there's obviously a chance that they become atheist anyway and don't care about religion in general, because you are scared that they will change or convert to other religions, what you do as a precondition, or what you do to prevent that, is to invalidate those other options in the first place. I think the second thing is religions are scared, so there's a positive first mover advantage when you're able to invalidate other religions, and when one religion does it, others often retaliate, which is why every religion ends up doing it to a certain extent. I think the third thing is, invalidating is often the path of least resistance, and it's the easiest thing to do, because if you just claim that there is no philosophical validity to another religion, you no longer have to do the harder, more specific, like nuanced work of comparing certain verses in one religious script to another and explaining why that is different and why yours is better in that way. So the easiest way to do all of these things is by simply invalidating those religions philosophically. Two extensions from from closing government. I think the first thing clashes directly with opening opposition, but also sidesteps the issues that were there in opening half. It's why individuals within religions are likely to accept this narrative, and it's likely to be something that they internalize and use in how they practice their own religion. I think the first thing I want to talk about is religious individuals often do want to err on the side of caution. I mean a couple of things by this. The first is, I think you often recognize that there are other people around you that you love, like your friends, your significant other, people in your own family that have different religious interpretations. And a lot of people are often aware that these interpretations might be similar to theirs or different to theirs in a number of ways. I think the second thing is you are often cognizant that your own opinions on religion might change over the course of your life. And note that this is true as per OO's own analysis, that individuals are becoming increasingly questioning of religions. You go through crises of faith, you have situations where you might have epiphanies that a certain thing within your religion doesn't align with your own personal beliefs. I think that the third thing is this idea is often in line with other religious doctrinal values. I mean a couple of things by this. I think a lot of things are taught in most religions, like tolerance for those that are different to you, caring for thy neighbor, things like doing good for people that aren't of your same faith, like doing service, doing charity, donating, helping when times of natural disasters and times of crisis, even if someone is from a different faith. I think all of this means that it is often accepted for you to maintain your own religion and act in line with your own religion while recognizing that others are still potentially valid. I think the second thing is religions operate in a hierarchical manners. So for example, if religious leaders say, we believe that Christianity has equal philosophical validity because it also advocates for things like service, or it also outlines certain things that are sins, or it also believes in a conception of afterlife, but they also say those conceptions are like the conception of these things in Christianity is dependent on you doing XYZ thing, but in our religion, the way you access this is dependent on you doing ABC thing. I don't think that creates any type of contradiction within the minds of followers, because you can simultaneously reconcile that there is similar philosophical validity because you believe in the afterlife, you believe in certain things being sins, but recognize that the path to accessing those things is different within your religion. I think also, if you believe that followers learn things like hate for other religions through religious institutions and leaders, you also have to accept that when those same institutions and leaders advocate for pluralism, it will largely be done in a way that is palatable to their followers. I think the last thing is you have increased interaction, which means increased cognizance of the fact that individuals from other religions should not be demonized.
Point.
And I think this is another reason why you're able to accept that your religion is valid, but others might also be. Sorry, I wasn't checking the time. The second thing I want to run is why the experience of religion becomes significantly better. And this is specifically for those individuals that are having crises of faith, that are doing things like questioning their religion and all of these things. I think the way religion is defined right now is often quite inaccessible because you are told that there is only one correct way to accessing salvation, and there is only one philosophically valid mechanism of making God happy or being a good religious person. I think when you normalize the idea that there are other equally philosophically valid interpretations of what God wants, those individuals that would otherwise just become atheist or become not religious at all and not have access to things like support systems, not have access to things like sources of guidance, now are able to explore those without guilt, without feeling like they're doing something that is inherently bad, or without doing something that they feel like is in inherent contradiction to their religious practices, because they can recognize that their own religion believes that there are potentially other valid interpretations, and you're able to explore that guilt-free, which means you have the most flexibility, which is the most important, because that's what retains individuals within religion writ large. And the ultimate benefit of being a religious person is that you have that sense of community, it makes you happy, a support system, things you can turn to for sources of guidance. We ensure more people retain that for all those reasons. Propose.
I thank the member of government and remind everyone to take POI. Member of opposition, please.
Okay, cool. I apologize for the weird light that makes it look like I'm trying to go for a religious prophet vibe. I promise I'm not. Okay, I'll take POIs in chat, please. That would be fantastic. Starting in 3, 2, 1. In our worst case, antagonizing other faiths is affirmatively good. First, many individuals find solace in religion precisely because they bind and unite around a shared and common other. They feel like their faith is the correct one and all others are incorrect, that they are the one who have a preferential and superior claim to theological righteousness. And furthermore, many people find it incredibly cathartic to feel like they bind with their neighbors, with their sons, with the people who go to school with them, who sit next to them at the mosque at church, precisely because there are other people who will be destined for hell. Importantly, the vast majority of religious antagonism does not lead to violence. First, because the greatest propensity for antagonism is interdenominational, like between Protestants and Catholics, for example. But over time, these conflicts have gradually become less and less intense, particularly because the world has become more prosperous, because there has been a reduced incentive to go to conflict. But more importantly, because most religions are geographically segregated. So the Tuareg religion in Niger occupies predominantly the northern part of the country, which means opportunities for violence are relatively limited. And that means that the emotional catharsis which comes from antagonizing other faiths often outweighs the harms which flow from violence. But even if that doesn't work, in many cases, conflict in this debate is largely symmetric, because the vast majority of religions prescribe strongly anti-violent messages, like you ought not kill, you ought not beat. The reason that matters then is that most religious conflicts are not fundamentally about religion, nor are they bottom up. They are top-down conflicts waged, for example, by the Mohammed bin Salman dynasty within Saudi Arabia, utilizing religion as a shield. But importantly, given that most religious conflicts are not actually caused by religion, but justified via religion, these conflicts largely happen on either side of the house, particularly because there are many other plausible ways in which you can justify conflict. For example, by pointing to ethnic or racial or socioeconomic grievances as the driving, justifying force behind that conflict, which means the margin of impact on violence is not where the debate is at. Two extensions then from closing opposition. First, advocacy for religious pluralism greatly reduces the scale of religious good-doing in the world, especially on charity. There are three ways this happens. First, as opening government concedes, religions must theologically justify why they are undermining centuries of dogma. That often necessarily means downplaying the importance of old scripture and undermining the credibility of historical religious figures like Moses. Even if we buy the best version of opening government and overcome opening opposition and claim that people perceive this as inconsistent, the problem is people now have a legitimate internal psychological justification to shirk the many other charitable religious duties like zakat imposed by that scripture and by those figures, because their credibility has been discredited by your local priest, because you are now doubtful as to whether or not the teachings of the Bible are in fact correct, which provides people with the internal justification necessary to shirk the giving duties like tithing they would rather not do. Secondly, even if closing government's second extension is correct, and many people now shop around and join other religions, that's actively bad for two reasons. The first is it reduces religious economies of scale, because presently, many local communities are relatively religiously homogeneous because people self-select into areas where they are like others. That is good because investing in religious charity often has high upfront costs, like staffing, for example, or running food pantries, which means it is good for everyone in the local community to congregate around shared religious values because that increases the efficiency of charity. But on their side, you fragment those local communities because now there is one mosque, one Catholic church, one Presbyterian church, which necessarily reduces the efficiency of charity, even if donations are symmetric. But secondly, there's a race to the bottom effect on their side of the house. Presently, it is good for people to be in faiths where they are expected, for example, to provide 10% of their income to charity, because people presently find meaning in that because they believe it is expected of them by God. But on their side of the house, there is no longer any incentive to remain in that religion. And in fact, there is a strong interest to shop around to the religion with the least restrictive impositions upon you, which often reduces the interest in staying in a religion that demands of you large donations. But thirdly, on their side of the house, you often reduce the incentive for religions to invest heavily into very difficult charitable projects, precisely because religions often engage, for example, in proselytizing or missionary programs, precisely because their goal is to spread what they believe, certainly as the correct interpretation of God. That often means they compete with other religions to prove, for example, that they have the most correct interpretation. Now, this might happen to some extent on either side of the house, but on their side of the house, there is doubt. Maybe my interpretation of God is no better than that of others, and there is no reason to believe that my imposition of faith on other people is theologically correct, which reduces that incentive. This is maybe in some cases marginal, but panel, do not forget how crucial religious charity is. The biggest barrier to most people defining religion is poverty. You cannot attend mass if you are sick. You cannot attend services if you are dead. Food insecurity affects hundreds of millions of people. And importantly, this outweighs all of the conflict arguments made by both government teams. The largest driver of conflict is not religion. It is poverty. It is deprivation, a lack of opportunity. Even if we reduce that on the margins, this literally saves far more human meaning than anything government bench can claim. Before I move on to our final extension about sapping meaning from religion, OG.
If all religions have the similar core tenets of giving, loving, etc., they would do it regardless.
No, I already gave, I think, 3 reasons that beat that. The first is that, yes, you will still give, it's less efficient. The second is that there is now a reduced incentive to stay in faith with strict tithing expectations, precisely because now you join the lowest common denominator. The third is, even if you still donate, the point is that there is less donations en masse. The reason that matters is every dollar matters. The marginal impact on someone who finds some meaning in religion is much less intense than the impact on a person who literally no longer has access, for example, to services provided by Catholic missionaries. Finally, on sapping meaning from religion. Characterization. The most important group of religious people we should care about in this debate are not people in the West. In fact, the vast majority of religious people often live in developing countries, in relatively poorer states. Think Latin America, favelas in Brazil, Latin American countries like the Philippines. Why do these people find meaning in religion? They find it because of 2 things, community and stability. Gov eradicates both. First, on community, closing government provides the very reason why these communities become torn apart, because people are now more willing to leave their faith. You grew up on our side of the house Catholic. So did everyone else. You bonded over your shared faith. You went to the same religious school. You had the same religious preacher. You found meaning in community because everyone had the same faith. On their side, you fragment communities. Remember, the areas we're talking about are often areas racked by poverty, violence, instability. The most meaningful things people find in life is often the fact that everyone in their same community is of the same religion. Gov distorts that. But more importantly, you eradicate stability on their side of the house. Because on their side, you are told all faiths can offer salvation. But most people don't believe all faiths will offer salvation, which often means on their side of the house, you know that God's word is uncertain. There is doubt. You do not know if you are abiding by the correct religious teachings. You do not know of the thousands of religions out there, whether all are actually valid or if that was simply what you were told. On our side of the house, the comparison is much better. You are far more likely to believe legitimately like your faith is the correct one, the certain one. And that is the most important impact because stability and reducing doubt is akin to reducing terror. We oppose.
I thank the member of opposition and welcome the government whip.
Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Cool. So I'll take 2 POIs because Kira didn't take one. I'll take both at around the 5th minute. I'll take them back to back. So I'll take one from OO and then I'll answer it, and I'll take one from CO. If either team doesn't have one, then I'll just take one because it's not my fault. Okay. God bless. All right. 3, 2, 1. OG is out. Number 1, because as CO correctly identifies, OG's case is self-defeating. If religion has an organic incentive to change over time to get more members, then it undercuts the necessity of this particular iteration of it, and OG never justifies it. Second of all, even if you buy the frame from opening government, I think opening government's arguments are unpersuasive for the reason that in the deeply secessionary and divided states that they want to talk about, it is unclear and there's a massive analytical gap.
Sorry, can I, my partner dropped, apparently. I'm so sorry to do this. She just...
Okay. Let's pause.
Okay. I'm so sorry about this. I'm DMing her right now to see what happened.
Maddie has vanished.
Yeah, sorry about
Yeah,
that.
I started the minute timer. Don't worry.
Sam, can I just start over?
Yeah. But also she has 2 minutes, I think, to come back.
I think
Maddie,
I'm
you
so
back?
sorry.
Oh,
Sorry, I'm so sorry. I'm back now.
You hear? Can everyone? All good?
We're just restarting the gov whip speech.
Yeah. I'll just start over. But yeah, just POIs in the chat. I'll take 2. Because Kira didn't take one. Just gonna say that again because it's funny. Okay. All right. 3, 2, 1. OG is out for 2 reasons. Number 1, as closing op correctly identifies, OG's case is self-defeating. If religion already has an organic incentive to change, it undercuts the necessity of pluralism because there are other mechanisms of doing so. Second of all, even if you buy everything opening government says, opening government's arguments are unpersuasive for the reason that they're largely speculative. In the context in which they want to talk about, in which there's deep sectarian divide, there is a massive analytical gap. Why is religion the tipping point as compared to things like ethnicity or socioeconomic divide and causing things, for example, like these particular harms? But even beyond this, the issue of opening government is there is a massive gap between how religion advocates and how that affects the incentive of states. They do not ever prove why states are likely going to change in a particular way as a result of religious signaling, which is why our argument is far more significant, because our argument was inherent to the motion and inherent to how religious individuals will change and also how religious organizations are going to change. I'm going to talk about two things. First of all, let me rebuild our extension because I do not think Ryan understood it, so Maddie can respond. Our extension was not about violence. That was opening government. I agree. Opening government is probably out of this debate. Our extension was about the ability for minorities and individuals to exercise a degree of flexibility within that religion. And the reason as to why this was important was because Keerthana's mechanism in this debate was not minorities will leave the church and therefore find salvation. It was that they're able to interpret religion in a different way and find meaning in that way while simultaneously accessing that community. And this beats back a lot of the closing opposition analysis because Seal doesn't actually ever explain why religious pluralism suddenly leads to a lot of individuals opting out of that religion altogether. First reason why this is unlikely, if they're correct that this debate is about the favelas in Brazil and poor communities in places like Philippines, oftentimes that sense of community is still quite important to you. And for reasons such as you have invested emotional connections, there's economic sunk cost that you have placed into that community. Even if suddenly the religion says they want to be pluralistic, it is unclear as to why you're going to leave for the reason that you still like this community. But second of all, if it is the case that people are so materialistic, they have an incentive already to opt out of this community anyways, because O is correct. There's a rising trend of secularism. So this religious pluralism does not become the tipping point. But if people really just care about not donating that much money, they will just leave the religion on both sides of the house. But finally, and this is important, Seal never proves why religious pluralism equals mandate, because it doesn't. It just says that other religions are equally valid, but importantly, people can still have revealed preferences for Christianity or Islam, so they're still likely going to stay. 4 pieces of clarification, therefore, I want to make under what this extension actually means and how this deals with the op bench writ large. Number 1, we made it very clear. Right now, the issue is that there's an asymmetry of power that exists, and organically, religions have an incentive to defame and harm other religions as a mechanism of gaining into control. What was the extension Keerthana gives you here? Keerthana explains why it is the path of least resistance, why oftentimes there's a positive first mover advantage to shit on other religions because you are uncertain whether or not the other religions are going to do the same. But increasingly, in a context in which people are clowning on religion because that is what individuals who are secular does, it becomes persuasive and palatable for the average religious institution to also radicalize and mock other religious institutions because that is a mechanism by which they're able to use to make them seem quite relevant. Why didn't we change this on our side of the house only? And there are 2 implications Keerthana draws from this. The first is because this is a universal policy or a universal thing that happens to all religions, when religions realize that everyone else is going to be accepting of their dogma or their perception of truth, they're less likely also going to want to attack these other religious truths because it is a waste of money and resources to do so, and there are other better things they can do. The impact here was on the ability on the ground to feel as though their religion is meaningful, because the biggest problem right now with the rise of secularism for individuals who are religious is not they do not know what the Bible is or they cannot participate in the church, is that every living moment in which they exist in society, they feel as though their religious identity is devalued because the person who is Muslim will say to the Christian, you are wrong. The person who is secular will say to the Christian, your religion is a joke. On our side, we're able to substantially mitigate this because religions no longer become adversarial to one another. So therefore, individuals do not feel as though there's massive amounts of microaggression and harassment thrown at them. Therefore, they can practice their religion better. This is why you get agency and fulfillment and feel as though you're better able to live a good life. That was the first extension. This weighs in every single individual, and therefore this is the same weighing as opening opposition, but we proved the link towards that. But the second implication we draw here is that you're able to better spare the amount of money you have, and therefore you're able to allocate money towards more individuals. Because what Keerthana explains here, and this response to closing opposition, is that right now there's a lot of incentive for individuals to do things like send missionary trips to other places with the explicit intent of, shitting on other religions and convincing people that they're right. You place heavy amounts of money and resources on the reinterpretation of dogma and constantly reading those scripture. Obviously, this might be meaningful, but the comparative when there's no longer a necessity to do that is you're more likely going to have things, for example, like charity things and trips because you have excess capital that exists. And the reason as to why this matters, both because it provides for salvation for the most vulnerable people that CO talks about that have no material needs, but this is also important because the issue on op is, even if there is an incentive to do charity, that charity, because of the finite amount of capital, only exists for the most privileged or the majority of individuals, but the most minority of individuals are left out of the ability to access that wealth. When you increase the pool of funding, all of these individuals therefore also access wealth. This is religion changes for the better on our side. Before I explain why you get higher degrees of flexibility, opening up.
Flexibility mechanism is hung on the idea that you could ever find a religious justification for pluralism. But as we point out in our speech, it's not like eating fish during Lent or female pastors. Claim to authority is something that you can't find because the Bible would be self-defeating if it said, oh, by the way, this is just something that could be true. It's core across all religions.
Yeah, there are two things I want to say here, and this is important because it also fleshes out the fullest extent of the flexibility argument. The first thing we prove, and this completes the opening government analysis, is that religions have the capacity and incentive to do this well. The reason why this is important is because the extent of the opening opposition push is that there are fundamental parts of the thing that is contradictory. Therefore, you cannot get pluralism. That is untrue for the reason that in the vast majority of instances, maybe practices are contradictory, but the end outcome of those practices are not. E.g., the conception of the afterlife in Islam is different from Christianity. So you can explain that these are social constructions and both can be valid, but one way then undermines the ability to access the afterlife in the other paradigm. So you can explain those as equally valid paradigms, but still have a revealed preference for one, which is why individuals are likely going to have an incentive to opt in, both for the reasons because they want to err on the side of caution, but because generally speaking, there's no massive harm towards them. Why then was this important? This was important because of the flexibility argument. Our argument was very simple. When religious leaders start acknowledging that other versions of religion are valid, it also means that internally within your religion, you're forced to acknowledge that different practices within that religion is valid. And this matters because for the most vulnerable of individuals who cannot access salvation because of arbitrary factors right now, but also do not want to leave the community because of the sunk costs, the ability to reinterpret that religion in a valuable way is important because insofar as utility is subjective, giving the agency to individuals to decide how religion is meaningful is the most important thing. And only we on closing government are able to do that. For all those reasons, CG.
I think the government whip and welcome the opposition whip.
Hi, can I be heard?
Yep.
Okay, I might just keep my camera off because I've been dropping like multiple times throughout Ted's speech. I'll also take POIs verbally. Oh, sorry, not.
Hi, is it just me or did Opwhip drop? Or is not speaking?
Yeah, we're just gonna wait for her to come back. I think she's either. Yeah, Ryan, can you deal with this?
Yeah, sorry, I'm doing that right now. I am DMing her. We're not quite sure what happened with her Wi-Fi. Sorry about this. I am. Okay, she says, give me a min. I'm not quite sure what the iron person policy is, but if she can't give it, am I allowed to give op whip? I'm not quite sure what the tournament policy is.
I'm pretty sure you are.
Okay, that would be unideal. I will keep you in the loop.
I think she has like 2 more minutes, but like, I'll be real, online debating's what it is, so we'll just watch my timer. I'm gonna look up the exact timer thing for drops. I think it's 2 minutes. But yeah, I would.
Yeah, strangely enough, it's the first time this has ever happened to me in a round that I'm in, so we are trying to figure it out.
It's an act of God, Ryan.
Exactly.
Okay.
God is intervening.
It is. Oh God. Scrolling up the Discord. The time is going, so it doesn't matter
Yeah.
now. I'm just like chatting and looking. I do
Sorry.
highly recommend you. Okay, great, she's back. Okay, that was under a minute, so it's definitely under disconnection policy. Maddie, whenever you're ready.
Hi, sorry, can I be heard?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, so if I drop, I think Ryan can just take on from where I finished if I don't join again.
Yep, no problem.
Okay. The first thing I want to talk about is how do different religions interact with one another at the moment and when they promote multi-pluralism. This deals with both the OG claim that religions now openly condemn each other, as well as CG's claim that religions will not antagonize each other after promoting multi-pluralism. The first thing is OG themselves gives us the reason that wars are costly and you risk losing lots of followers if you want to actively, openly antagonize each other all the time. Ryan further explains why conflict is increasingly unlikely due to secularism and increased cost of war. To directly respond to the unreasonable push we get from DPM that if religions do not promote multi-pluralism, they must condemn everyone else. In reality, as a Protestant, you probably think the Catholic version of faith isn't accurate. As a Muslim, you probably will never ever believe Christianity, which does not even share the same God as you, which scripture dates don't align with your oath to be real or true. But this is not the same as religions emphasizing this all the time. They often choose to ignore and dismiss other religions instead. Secondly, then, the CG claim under this is that promoting multi-pluralism will not be done in an antagonistic way because what happens is religions will just go through scripture, find similarities, and then explore them together, which results in positive interactions, never proving to us why this is the most likely scenario or why this is the case. The issue is this is highly cherry picking. Maybe two religions can believe animals are holy and therefore coexist contently. The issue is promoting multi-pluralism also means you have to be adamant that you have to deal with adamant and devout followers who want to resist an ideological shift. They are the ones who now question all the harder to answer parts of multi-pluralism. Why do we not pray to the same God? Why are those people having fewer duties than we do? And maybe if it is true that different groups have similarities, they already often have incentives to cooperate politically by pushing for similar religious rights, but not having to concede to the other's philosophy. So it's unclear to me why on their side of the house, they get the best version of how this motion is likely to manifest. What does CG then tell us then? CG then also says in their member speech that now religions can't do the easy work to invalidate other faiths, but instead have to talk about it and justify it with like dealing with the nuance of it. The issue I have with this is after 14 minutes of their case, I have no bloody clue what this nuance is and why this talk will end positively. They don't prove the burden for this argument to even be held true in the first place. Now let's deal with all the responses we get from GovWhip to our case. They offer 3 responses to our extension. Firstly then, they say that people will not leave religions and can still have a revealed preference for their original faith. Sure, we aren't contingent on people leaving religion, but attachment to faith weakens greatly on their side. And we give you 2 compelling mechanisms. One, that people find solace in otherizing other people's religions. This rarely leads to violence as we mechanize to be OG, but this does provide people with a strengthened sense of community and certainty in their faith. Maybe everyone stays in the same religion on either side, but on our side, people find a closer sense of solidarity, which is really important. Second, on their side, as OG concede, they must justify where religious dogma can permit this narrative. This means you must downplay historical scripture, which explicitly reveres one religion and one God. But our argument goes above OO. It's not just that you can literally, it's not that you cannot justify pluralism. It is you discredit these stories, the commandments and teachings, which impose upon people strict requirements to do things like zakat or pay fees. And the issue is, it's not just that it is inconsistent, but it is the type of people who are telling you the message that other religions are also permissible. These are often your pastors and your priests and individuals you highly, highly respect and believe to the closest embodiment or the closest messenger of religion to yourself. Look, this doesn't mean everyone leaves or disengaged, but this does mean, truthfully, that many people now have credible doubt as to whether they should fork over 10% of their income or spend their weekend at a food bank, when many people, they themselves, are also struggling in the real world. Let's then weigh this against the top half. This argument comes before the top half clash. The gut check, the largest barrier to finding any meaning in religion as per OO, or feeling safe in your community as a minority per OG, is deprivation and poverty. Our claim isn't that Gov eliminates charity, as the POI suggests in straw mans, but instead, it's that God reduces charity on a large enough scale to meaningfully hurt the very minorities both OG and CG care about. Second, CG claims that they get more money in total for religious charity on their side. Just to be clear, most religious charity is done by the large and massive religions our extension describes, not the smaller faiths talked about by CG that's largely irrelevant. But our mechanism on religious inefficiency, the race to the bottom, and shopping around do explain why you get far less money on their side of the house. All of this just means is that on their side, they don't actually get more money for religious charity, but we give you a more certain impact for why for larger charities or larger religious charities, the contribution they receive actively decreases. Sorry, two things, not three things. Now moving on to opening government. What did opening government tell us? Opening government first told us that multi-pluralism increases support because it reduces war and social conflict. The biggest issue I have with their case is twofold. One, they don't prove why wars will significantly reduce in the first place or why there is a need for wars to significantly reduce. And second, even if wars reduce, they don't show why this is the primary interest of followers to trade off huge amounts of religious certainty that we frame to you on CO. Let's now disprove these two claims. Firstly, why won't wars significantly reduce? To start off, religious wars have not been very common. Generally, in the modern day, it's even less common as religions try to maintain peace and have little incentive to actively paint other religions as evil and fake. OG themselves give us the reason for why that is true. But also, second, lots of wars are started by selfish leaders instead of heads of religions who have incentives beyond upholding ideological purity. This looks like leaders trying to grip onto power, using religion as a justification to tame groups of impure, unholy, and sinful creatures. The best response might just be, no, but it is a justification for you to do so, versus when you have religious pluralism, you can do so less. But often, if leaders have malicious incentives, they're able to twist them into social conflicts instead of religious conflicts, which directly wipes out their case. Before I move on, I'll take opening.
We already told you that like there will be sectors of modern Muslims regardless, which means if you're talking about funding, those people will move away regardless because of infighting.
Understood. Dude, the moderate person you are talking about, you still have to challenge the basis of their faith, why other gods are also valid. Even the moderate person cannot accept this. Moving on, even if OG proves war decreases, here's why this is not most followers' primary concern. Because many religious followers live in peacetime, as Ryan proves to you. But also, second, for lots of religious followers, often they view religion as a solace for real-life struggles and a way to absolve their guilt. Maybe each individual instance of comfort and community is not as severe as the impact of war itself, but they often accumulate and they create a collective sense of meaning and a goal or moral compass in life that becomes indispensable to many people. And here's where the CG first extension actually becomes really important, because what we prove to you is not just that things are inconsistent like what OO claims, but instead that often you lose religious certainty, and why that certainty is so important, especially in the CG context when often they claim some people may have crises in their religions and may not feel like things are working out for them. That's even the more so important for individuals to build that certainty and faith and to believe even if things are not serving their way, it is really important that they can hold off to something like a moral compass or can hold off to something like a community that will deeply care about them. For all of these reasons, we decided to better proves how individuals engage with religion and how religion engages with needy communities.
Thanks, Whip. Everyone leave so we can discuss. Bye.